Hi, I'm Stephanie, and I'm a certified personal trainer.
Hi, I'm Kate, and I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist.
And this is a podcast dedicated to educating women on their journey to optimal health. There's so much that we can do to optimize our health, but we've talked to so many women who just simply don't know how.
These conversations are what inspired us to start OmniaFit. The OmniaFit podcast is all about interviewing certified professionals to educate women on improving our health. We'll talk about things like stress relief through exercise, what we need to know about our hormones, the truth behind fad diets, and more. So subscribe, follow along, and let us know if there are any topics you want to hear more about. Hello, this is Kate here, and this week I have on a special guest, Lisa Andrews, and she is a fellow registered dietitian nutritionist, as well as having her master's in education. And we are here today to talk about all things related to menopause. So, Lisa, welcome on.
Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, this is a really exciting topic for a lot of listeners. I think even people closer to my age who aren't close to menopause, I feel like it's something that it's still great to learn about early. So do you kind of want to just jump into like the basics, like definition of menopause, kind of where, starting from the beginning?
Sure. So typically we think of menopause being in 3 stages, starting with perimenopause, which is prior to menopause. So women that are still having their periods are technically in the perimenopause phase, but when we think of perimenopause as they start to get closer to menopause, they'll typically experience some irregular periods, maybe some irritability, start to get vaginal dryness, insomnia. And the other thing that people in perimenopause can experience, and this is typically in their kind of late 30s to sort of mid 40s, is potential unexpected pregnancy. So that is one thing to kind of be concerned about as women get a little bit older and they think, oh, I'm 42, there's no chance I'm going to get pregnant, and then they go off of birth control, and then, the oops baby. So the second phase is menopause, and a person is in menopause when they have a full 12 months of their period ending, and it's frustrating for some women because they sort of start and stop. So they'll go for like 10 months without a period, and then on that 11th month, they'll get a period, and that technically puts them back into perimenopause. So they really haven't had 12 full months of, the absence of their menstrual cycle. So with menopause, typically women experience some of the same symptoms, but a little bit more severe because their hormone levels are just really out of whack. So again, more issues with what we call vasomotor symptoms or hot flashes, vaginal dryness, irritability. Some people start to gain weight. They notice they have some insomnia, and depression and anxiety are also pretty common in this sort of stage. And then postmenopause is really that time period after menopause has sort of ended. But, the definition really sort of varies because some people will have, hot flashes for years and years after their period has ended. So for some people that might be at the age of 55 or 60, they're considered sort of postmenopause. But it's sort of a strange term because some people are experiencing those menopausal symptoms even after their period has stopped for a year.
Yeah, so let's say someone who is maybe entering into that perimenopause phase. What are some things that they could kind of do to start to prepare for that next step that's coming in terms of nutrition, health, overall wellness, kind of going into that next phase?
Yeah, that's a great question. For one, I would start tracking your periods so that when you see your GYN each year, you could kind of give them an update of how frequently your periods are coming or if they're more severe. The other thing is to maintain some kind of exercise routine, because the biggest complaint, at least that I experience with my own clients, is weight gain. So to make sure that they're doing some type of aerobic activity, 150 minutes a week just for baseline, but they probably need more exercise if they're, trying to lose weight. And then to definitely incorporate some type of strength training, at least a few days a week to maintain bone mass, because that's typically as women get older, they lose more bone as their estrogen levels decline, and then they're higher risk for osteoporosis. As far as their diet goes, probably the one thing that's really hard to hit home is alcohol, because it's legal, it's fun, everybody loves a cocktail, but depending on the woman's age, the later in life that she goes through menopause, so for women that go through menopause after 55, the risk for breast cancer is higher. And then as far as weight gain goes, we know that postmenopausal women just tend to put on more weight around the middle, so sort of reducing processed sugars, added sugars, alcohol, soft drinks, those sorts of things are probably beneficial to their diet. And then just eating, more plants, more fiber, whole grains, fruits and vegetables, beans, nuts and seeds, healthy oils. Those are all beneficial because as women get older, the risk for heart disease also goes up postmenopause.
Yeah, and I mean, so many of those tips are beneficial for all life stages. So
Right.
would you say probably like the sooner in life that you can kind of implement those healthy lifestyle changes, is that just sort of setting you up for an easier transition down the road?
Definitely. And what I've noticed with my clients is that the ones that never had to diet and then all of a sudden they've got this weight gain, it's almost more frustrating to them than the clients that have always kind of dealt with, I was always a little heavy in college and, had a difficult time taking off the baby weight. It's almost more difficult for women that have never had to diet, at least what I've experienced from my own clients, when they have to make those changes abruptly, because all of a sudden they are starting to gain weight and notice that their hot flashes are worse because they're either drinking more alcohol or just have been drinking alcohol for such a long time. The other thing is caffeine intake should just be monitored. It doesn't have to be completely avoided, but it can make women's hot flashes worse as they're going through menopause.
Yeah, for sure. And so in terms of, let's say, like maybe some misconceptions that you get a lot from clients, are there anything that's kind of a theme that you see a lot of clients who come in and something they've read online or something that you can kind of debunk for them?
I think the biggest one is this, and I shouldn't say that low carb is not useful, but because there are benefits to, a lower carb diet for, women that have polycystic ovary syndrome and prediabetes and diabetes. But when they go on like a really low keto diet and then they continue to drink alcohol and then they can't figure out why they're not losing weight. So that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions, is that they feel like they're doing something really healthy by not eating carbs and thinking that that's going to be the magic bullet for them to lose weight. But then they, to continue to consume alcohol without thinking that that's going to impact their weight and health over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And is there anything that you kind of see in terms of a tie? I know you said earlier that there can be some ties between cancers as well. Do you want to go into that a little bit? That's interesting. I haven't really heard that.
Yeah, so the risk for breast cancer goes up for women with even just 3 drinks or more per week. So for women that are at risk for breast cancer, the recommendation is not to consume more. I mean, the moderation according to the dietary guidelines is 1 drink per day, but for women at risk for breast cancer, the recommendation is really 3 drinks or less per week. So, that's a suggestion that I bring up to people, and a lot of people haven't heard that before. Another misconception that you just made me think of was this HCG diet. So this human chorionic gonadotropin diet that people go on, where they take these drops or they take these pills and then they go on this crazy 500 calorie diet and they lose their hair, or they lose, they lose weight initially, but then they can never go back on that type of diet because it's ridiculously restrictive, and then they end up just losing muscle mass. So that's definitely one myth that I've seen over the years that people have tried to do that really doesn't do any good other than make them frustrated and unhappy.
Yeah, and I know too, there's definitely sort of a fine line right between as you're aging and losing bone mass and whatnot, where in a certain sense, like, weight loss isn't the best thing, correct? Because you don't necessarily want to lose like that muscle mass that you have, right?
Right. And the other thing is, when another complaint with women as they get older is, that their skin changes. So they lose collagen and they lose elastin in their skin, and estrogen helps to protect sort of that skin tone and everything. But as they lose weight, and especially if for older women that lose too much weight, their skin really gets more wrinkled and more saggy. So if I have somebody that's kind of in that upper age bracket, postmenopausal, 62 to 75 years old-ish, that really just wants to lose like 10 pounds, a lot of times I'll just say, you're almost better off keeping that weight, because you really do need the resilience, not only for your bone mass and your skin, but also your immune system. So we really don't want women getting down to this tiny, pre-wedding number. and it's hard because everybody's, body image is different.
Yeah, and I feel like that's such a hard thing in general for women to hear. I remember even doing my clinical rotations and talking to older people about how they shouldn't lose weight, and that's such a weird thing as women to hear, because for so much of your younger life, you're trying to lose weight for so many people. And so kind of spinning off of a little bit of what you talked about, I know personally, like even my mom, when I started this podcast, was like, well, you can talk about menopause, but can you talk about after menopause? And kind of like, what do I do after menopause? Because there's tips out there for during it and before it, but what should I be doing after? So I know you kind of went into it a little bit, but if you wanted to give a few more sort of pointers for after menopause as you're kind of entering that next stage.
Yeah, one thing I didn't mention was getting enough calcium in the person's diet. So making sure they're including either dairy products that are high in calcium or substitutes that contain calcium. Because I know there's a lot of kind of, I'm not an anti-dairy person, but I know there's sort of a lot of anti-dairy people out there. And that's fine. People can eat and drink what they want, but they still will need to get the nutrition from some source. So making sure that their vitamin D level is checked, because it does tend to go down as people get older. So getting enough vitamin D in their diet in order to support bone health, getting enough calcium. The other thing is getting enough fiber in their diet, not only for weight management, blood sugar control, but also just to maintain a healthy gut microbiome. And they believe that may be related to some of the weight gain as women get older. Especially if they're following a really overly restricted diet and they're not getting enough fiber in their diet, that can impact their microbiome and their weight gain.
Yeah, and maybe even like on the sense of family support. I know sometimes, let's say, like as someone is getting older, maybe they are struggling with like eating more calories and eating more food, but maybe they got recommendations like about getting more calcium. Or how do you feel like kind of a good support system around that would be in terms of, the mindset around kind of how your needs are shifting as you get older, and kind of accepting that and helping loved ones accept that?
That's a really difficult topic. I mean, that's a hard thing to do. I would say for women, and really for anybody in general of any age, it's really important to have a nice social support group. And they can also support you with exercise. So, if I have clients that really hate to exercise, I'll ask if they have a buddy that can join them, because it's social and they're doing something positive and it gets them outside sometimes, unless it's the dead of winter. And then, maybe you recommend they go to the mall and walk or take a class or something like that, when we're not in COVID, obviously. But I would say for them to have some type of support group of their peers that aren't ridiculous, because, everybody's got that friend or colleague that's sometimes a little bit competitive, and then it makes it sort of weird. So you want somebody that's supportive, that's not going to sabotage your efforts necessarily, but is able to talk to you about certain things that you're comfortable with, close friend or sister, family member, something like that.
Yeah, and there's definitely sort of a transition as well. I know you're the nutrition expert, but we know a little bit about the activity level and whatnot as well. And to my understanding, there's definitely sort of a transition where, doing that like hardcore aerobics class that you used to do maybe isn't the most beneficial thing anymore. And that can be kind of a tough transition for some, especially women as well. If you want to kind of speak to that, like sort of how your types of activity should even change a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, because our estrogen levels are lower as we get older and our bones aren't as protected, our risk for fracture is much higher. So, women that maybe used to run or do kickboxing or skiing or really high impact aerobics or something like that, they may want to shift into something that's a little gentler on their bones, but to still make sure that they're getting some type of weight bearing exercise. So, using either bands or small weights or Nautilus machines, but not necessarily, using a punching bag because, or we're just much higher risk for breaking a bone. So not getting on a skateboard, not necessarily rollerblading or those sorts of things. I actually have a friend that busted up her leg, something fierce, getting on her son's skateboard. And I was like, I would never get on a skateboard at this age. As fun as it looks, I would never do it. So, even getting into that mindset of, okay, I still need to stay active, but, maybe I'm not unable to do these things, but maybe I need to either take them at a slower pace or modify how I do my exercise in order to protect myself.
Yeah, and there's definitely sort of a focus too on that muscle mass as well. So sort of making sure to still focus on strengthening as well, rather than just sort of that like cardio focus that some people can kind of get wrapped up in as you get older.
Exactly. Yeah, and you want to do both. I mean, the benefit of doing weight training is, you're going to maintain more muscle mass long term, but it also improves insulin sensitivity. So as people, get a little bit older and their risk for diabetes goes up or pre-diabetes, that weight training exercise also improves insulin sensitivity, which a lot of people don't think about.
Yeah, do you actually want to explain that a little more? Because I feel like I always think that's such an interesting thing, and a lot of people don't necessarily understand like insulin sensitivity and kind of how we impact it. So if you could even explain that a little more, I think that would be beneficial.
Yeah, sure. So, insulin's, do you want me to get very, very basic? So, insulin's a hormone made by the pancreas that's secreted when our blood sugar is elevated after we eat. And in order for insulin to work, the cells sort of have to be able to accept the insulin for, blood sugar to get in the cell to be used up for energy. So as we get older, and particularly as we gain weight, fat cells become more resistant to insulin. So the insulin isn't working as efficiently as it should. So I sort of give the example of if you were trying to throw a baseball through a window and the window's open, that means the insulin was able to take the glucose into the cell and be used. But if the window's closed and you throw the ball and it bounces back, then that that blood sugar that extra glucose stays in the cell and can do damage to your cells over time. So, there's a couple different ways to improve your insulin sensitivity. Even just walking like 15 minutes after you've eaten dinner helps to lower your postprandial blood sugar. And then doing some type of weight training in and of itself improves your insulin sensitivity because you end up with less fat cells and the muscle cells are just a little bit more receptive to insulin.
Yeah, I think that's great background information. Sometimes I feel like we use terms and we understand them, and then, people are like, what does that mean? What am I impacting?
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah, and it's cool to think about how many ways you can kind of impact that you're not even thinking about, because, even multifunctional as well, like some things are just sort of what your body is kind of meant to do. Like it feels good to walk after dinner because you're improving your digestion, and you're also, like you said, on a deeper level, even helping with that insulin sensitivity, and so many things that kind of feel good for our bodies to do are also doing so many things, which is cool. That's kind of our instinct.
Yeah.
That feels good in all kinds of ways. So
Definitely.
And then kind of as we wrap up a little bit here, is there anything that you just sort of like really want to make sure that people take away from all life stages? Like what are like kind of your big, maybe like 3 things that you think are like the most crucial that you say all the time and maybe people don't think about until they come to talk to you?
One thing I have this philosophy of food is meant to be eaten and it's meant to be enjoyed. So, if you are trying to lose weight, use a smaller plate, because if you put more food on your plate, you're more likely to eat it all. The other thing is this guilt factor of either wasting the food or overeating. So I usually suggest, start off with smaller portions. If you're still hungry, then you can still go back for more. And I do this with my kids. Like if they're a little bit older now, but when they were small and we'd go to a potluck and they would just they want to try everything. So they'd load their plates with everything and their eyes are always bigger than their stomach. And I'd have to tell them, just because you can take everything doesn't mean you have to. So maybe, if you want like a burger and a hot dog, the two of you can split it. So, you could each try something, but just take a little bit less of it.
Yeah.
The other thing is try not to compare yourself to other people. And it's so hard. It's so hard, particularly for women, because, we are so bombarded with social media, whether that's comparing what we look like, what our hair looks like, what our legs look like, how much work we have to do, how much more followers somebody has than the other person. Who cares? Somebody suggested this one time to me, and it just really stuck with me. It was just basically just be the best you can be, and don't worry about everybody else. So just do what makes you feel good and happy, and roll with that, and usually you'll find some success. Now you asked me for 3.
Correct.
Let me think of one more.
Really
One more good one. I mean, really just find the activity that you enjoy. I mean, what kept me happy over the pandemic was pickleball. And I'd never played before, and I wasn't a tennis player, and I thought, oh God, I just feel like an idiot out here. And most of the time I do, but it makes me just laugh, and that makes me happy. So, follow your heart. Do what makes you happy.
Yeah, and it's great. I think what I love about talking to like-minded people in the space of wellness and everything is that even though everything we talked about was related to menopause, I think it just relates to everyone too, especially your final tips here. Like that is completely relatable to every age. And that's kind of the cool thing about building a healthier lifestyle is that it kind of sticks with you for the rest of your life if you're doing it right. So that's all what we love to hear. So
Yeah.
okay. So
any other questions?
I think that's it. That was so much good information, and it was so great to have you on. Thank you so much. And hopefully everyone learned something, no matter what age group they're at, about menopause and kind of just in general preparing for that next stage of life.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Thanks, Kate.
Feeling inspired yet? We've got you covered. At the very end of the season, we'll be launching our OmniaFit website. You'll be able to access a platform filled with on-demand workouts like yoga, HIIT, Zumba, barre, and more from several amazing instructors. You'll also have access to meal prepping tips, personalized grocery lists, and dozens of recipes given the official okay by our incredible dietitian, Kate.
Along with everything Stephanie mentioned, you'll also have access to schedule appointments with some of the licensed professionals featured in this season. Email info@omniafit.co to stay updated on our November launch date. You'll want to stay tuned because our first season listeners get their first month free. Just use promo code POD2021, that's POD 2021 to redeem.